There we go. Right. So we are, I think, right at the bottom of 12b. And we're on page 66 in the Sanhedrin, not art scroll, Stein's out. So those of you who are following in that. And where we left off last time, which is actually a month ago, where we left off was that we proved, in inverted commas, that the day of the equinox, meaning the vernal equinox, which is in the spring, the day where equinox, the day and the night are equal, which is around about the 21st of March, and the autumnal equinox, which is the day where night and day are the same in the beginning of the autumn, which is somewhere between 20th and 22nd of September. That's called the equinox. And we had a discussion about whether the day of the equinox itself belongs to the old season or belongs to the new season. In other words, is March the 21st the last day of winter or the first day of spring? And is September the 21st the last day of summer or the first day of autumn? Now, that was the discussion that we had. And the reason we had that discussion was to try and establish what was the criteria for intercalating a year, and on what was the final date, as it were. We know that we worked out in the last time that Chol HaMoed Sukkot, which is a day on which you are allowed to gather in produce, because it's not a chag, Chol HaMoed, that at least one of those days of Chol HaMoed Sukkot has to be in the autumn, because Sukkot is called Chag HaAsif, the festival of gathering in, and that's the autumn. So if the summer will extend right through Sukkot, and that the whole of Sukkot will be finished before the autumnal equinox, then we have to intercalate. We also know that Pesach has to be in the spring. Pesach is the 15th of Nisan. So if the 15th of Nisan is, and of course we know that Pesach, the main day of Pesach is the first day of Pesach. If the 15th of Nisan comes before March the 21st, that means that Pesach begins in the winter and not in the spring. And that means we would have to intercalate. So we had a discussion about what date within the month is the last possible date. Is it the 16th or is it the 21st? And we were talking about Sukkot, and there was one opinion that said all of Chol HaMoed has to be in the autumn, which means that the equinox has to come before the 16th of Tishrei, because that's the first day that you can of Chol HaMoed. The other opinion was that only one day of Chol HaMoed, if one day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot is in the autumn, then that's good enough, which means that the equinox, 21st of September, could be as late as the 22nd of Tishrei, and it would still be okay, or the 21st, and the 22nd would be no good. That was the discussion. And at the end of that discussion, we came to the point that the equinox day itself was the beginning of the new season. So March 21st was not the last day of winter, it's the first day of spring. September 21st is not the last day of summer, but it is the first day of autumn. Of course, what the Chachamim in the Gemarah did not know is that the end of summer is not at the autumnal equinox. The end of summer is the last day of the oval test match. Okay, the oval test match is always the last test match of the summer. It's in September, And the last day of the last test in the oval, that is the end of the summer. You put your pads away, you put your whites in the wash, and you hope that they still fit you when it comes around to spring the next year. And that's the end of the summer. But failing them knowing about the last day of the oval test match, the Chachamim worked on the basis that the first day of the new season was the equinox itself. That's where we got to last time. Now, having spent a couple of weeks getting them, I'm just going to mute you all because there's a bit of background noise. Anybody that wants to speak, just unmute. Having spent several weeks getting to that point, as is the Gemara's wont, it's now going to turn it on its head and ask us a question and say, really? Is that true? And that's exactly what we're going to do. Now I'm going to share you the screen. There we are. I'm just having a look where it is in the actual Gemarah. Yes, here we go. It is on 13a. 13a. And if you're in the Vilna Shas, it's about a third of the way down on 13a. We're over here on the screen. I assume you can see the screen, yes? Text on the screen. Okay, so let's just go back to the previous sentence. Rather, they certainly both hold. That means the two opinions, which is Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi, they both hold that the day of the equinox begins the new season. The first day of autumn is the 21st of September. First day of spring is the 21st of March. The Gemarah raises...
Johnny, is the equinox the same all over the world on the same day?
Yeah.
Okay.
The equinox is the circulation around the sun, and it's the point at which the day and the night are equal. It's where the sun's path is at the equator, one way or the other. Okay, it's the same in all over the world. In the southern hemisphere, what we call the autumnal equinox is the vernal equinox, and what we call the vernal equinox is the autumnal equinox. So in the southern hemisphere now, they are in the middle of winter. So when we finish our summer and it's the autumnal equinox, in other words, September the 21st this year, in the northern hemisphere will be the autumnal equinox, and in the southern hemisphere will be the spring or vernal equinox. They're both the same days in as much as they're both day and night is the same. They're both equinoxes, but in the southern hemisphere, they're going from winter to spring, and we're going from summer to autumn. Okay? So we've just said that both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yossi agree that the day of the equinox itself is the first day of the new season as opposed to the last day of the old season. Meitvei, I'll ask you a question, says the Gemarah. Yom Tkufa Gomer. There is a brighter which says, Meforash, openly and explicitly, the opposite of what we've just said. Yom Tkufa Gomer. The day of the equinox finishes off the last season. In other words, the day of the equinox is the last day of the old season, not what we've just said, which is the new day, the first day of the new season. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Yom Tkufa Matchil. Rabbi Yossi says that it's the beginning of the new season. So this brighter that we've just said is okay and agrees with the previous brighter as far as Rabbi Yossi is concerned. Rabbi Yossi is consistent in the two brighters. Rabbi Yossi says that the day of the equinox begins the new season in both brighters. But Rabbi Yehuda seems to be contradicting himself. In the first brighter that we learned last time, Rabbi Yehuda says that the equinox day begins the new season. And this brighter says that the equinox day ends the old season. How are we going to get out of that? That seems to be a complete contradiction. Okay, that's question number one. We've not finished. This brisa gets more difficult. Va'od, and furthermore, od means more, yeah, in modern Hebrew, yeah. When Yaki is blowing the shofar and he's just about finishing his breath, all the kids are shouting, od, 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 more, 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 more. So va'od, and furthermore, Tanya, we've learned in another brisa, a different brisa. Ein ma'abrin et hashana ela in kein haytka haytat kufa chasera rubo shel chodesh. We only intercalate a year if the tkufa, the season, is lacking the majority of its month. Now, it's a funny way of saying it. What it means is that the end of the season comes comes after the halfway point of the month, the majority of the month. Well, it doesn't say halfway. I told you wrong there. Ruba means the majority. Okay, I said halfway because that's one opinion. So, the kama ruba shel chodesh, and what does it mean? Most of the month. Shisha asar yom, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, beg your pardon, Shisha asar yom, 16 days. The first opinion is that the majority of a month is 16 days. That makes sense. A month is 29 or 30 days. So once you've gone through 16, then you've definitely gone through more than half the month. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Shtei yadot v'chodesh, 2 hands of a chodesh, 2 hands of a month. What it means is 2/3 of a month. I don't know why Shtei yadot is, why it doesn't say Shtei shlishiot or something. But Shtei yadot means 2/3. V'kama Shtei yadot v'chodesh, and how much is 2/3? Esrim yom, 20 days. A month is 30 days, so 2/3 is 20 days. Now, if Rabbi Yehuda, stay with me here, it gets a bit complicated. If Rabbi Yehuda says that the day of the equinox is the last day of the old season, as we've just said in the previous brisa over here, our first brisa this morning, if that's the case, then the new season would begin on the following day, okay, on the 21st. Okay, the equinox would fall on the 21st. The equinox is the last day of the season. The new season therefore starts on the 22nd, and that is after Chol HaMoed Sukkot, and that can't be. So that's another question against Rabbi Yehuda. Why does Rabbi Yehuda say 20 days? Because if it's 20 days and he holds that the equinox is part of the old season, then the new season, i.e. autumn, which is what we want, doesn't start till the 22nd. Are you with me? And if it doesn't start till the 22nd, we're stuffed, because Sukkot is finished. That means the whole of Chol HaMoed Sukkot was in the summer, and it was not Chag HaAsif. It was not the festival of the autumn. So that is 2 questions against Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda, in the, we'll call it last time's brisa, said 2 things. It said that the equinox belongs to the new season, and he also said that it's 21 days, not 20 days. Our 2 brisas this week say Rabbi Yehuda seems to be at conflict with himself and says the equinox day is not the last day of the old season. It's not the first day of the new season. It's the last day of the old season. And it's on the 21st of the month. Those 2 facts together give Rabbi Yehuda a big problem. Now, we're just going to digress a second to work out why it is that Rabbi Yossi says 16 days is the majority of the month. Because you could argue, couldn't you, that 15 days, that after 15 days, that's the majority of the month. A month can't be any longer than 30 days. A month is either 29 or 30 days. A real month is 29 and a quarter days. Which is why
it's 29, it's 15 days then.
Yeah, and if it's 30, it's also 15 days, isn't it? Right, it's 16 takes you over to the next one.
Yeah.
So we're gonna show Rabbi Yossi's calculations here. Rabbi Yossi says, Mechashvin. This is how the court works it out. Shisha asa lifnei Pesach. If the winter is not finished until 16 days into Nisan, in other words, the beginning of Pesach is in winter. In other words, winter is not finished till the 16th of Nisan. When did Pesach start? 15th of Nisan. So if winter didn't finish till the 16th of Nisan, that means that Pesach started in the winter. Okay? Shisha asa lifnei Chag ein ma'abrin. Okay? We do not, we can't have that. So we have to intercalate a year. We cannot have Pesach beginning before spring. So if spring doesn't start till the 16th, then we have to intercalate. Now, you would have thought that the same thing applies to Sukkot. But he goes on to say the following. This is Rabbi Yossi. Shisha asa lifnei Chag. When it says Chag, without saying which Chag, it always refers to Sukkot. Pesach is sometimes called Pesach. It's sometimes called Chag HaPesach. It's sometimes called Chag HaMatzot. It's sometimes called Chag HaAviv. It's never called Chag. Okay? Shavuot is called Chag HaShavuot. It's called Shavuot. It's called Chag HaBikurim. It's called Atzeret. It's never called Chag. Sukkot is called Sukkot. Chag HaSukkot, Chag HaAsif, and sometimes it's just referred to as Chag. So whenever you see just Chag, that's always Sukkot. So here, when he was talking about Pesach, he called it Pesach. When he's talking about Sukkot, he just calls it Chag. Shisha asa lifnei Chag ein ma'abrin. There's a difference. There is a difference between the spring and between Sukkot. So if the spring season of Tammuz, which is before the festival of the ingathering, is lacking its completion for 16 days into the month of Tishrei, the court does not intercalate it. In other words, if summer does not end before the 16th, you would have thought that you had to intercalate because Sukkot has begun in summer and not in autumn. But we know, don't we, that there is an opinion, and this is Rabbi Yossi's opinion, that if just one day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot is in the autumn, we're good, because it's still called Chag HaAsif. So the last day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot is the 21st. So that means that the equinox, if you say that the equinox is the beginning of the new season, then the equinox has to be on the 21st or before. If you say the equinox is the last day of the old season, then it has to be on the 20th, because only the next day is autumn, and you need at least one day of autumn in Sukkot, which is the 21st. Okay? So that's Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Rabbi Shimon says, no, I don't agree. Rabbi Shimon says, Af shisha asa lifnei Chag ma'abrin. Rabbi Shimon says, not only does there have to be one day of Chol HaMoed in autumn, He says all of Chol Hamoed Sukkot has to be in the autumn. And so he says, if the equinox is not before the 16th of Tishrei, you have to intercalate. A third opinion, Acherim, others. Now that usually refers to Rebbe Meir. When it's Acherim, we're not given a name, it's usually Rebbe Meir. And he says, Miyuto. He says it the other way around. We said that the equinox has to be after the majority. And he turns it on his head and says it has to be before the minority. And how much is the minority? Minority of the month, if you've got a month of 29 days, is the 14th, Arba Asar. Now, so the Gemarah then has a look and says, now this is unusual. It happens, but it's unusual. When we find situations like this, where you have a brighter which says X, and you have a brighter where the same people say Y, what the Gemarah usually does is it comes along and tries to find some convoluted reason why the two cases are not the same. And they'll say, yes, X is in such and such a situation. Y is in a different situation altogether. So the two cases are not comparable. So we don't have a contradiction between the two Bryces. Brysa 1 is talking about situation X, and Brysa 2 is talking about situation Y. And some of those arguments are very convoluted, and you think, come on, not having that. That's really, that's a bit of a dray. Occasionally, you get to the situation where even the Gemarah can't think of a way of reconciling these two opinions, and you get one of two responses. You get a response that we've had previously, which was teku. Remember that word teku? It has a modern Hebrew connotation. What's the modern Hebrew connotation of teku? Leon, you know this. Anyone? Teku? Yes, David?
A draw.
A draw in football, I suppose in basketball as well. If it's a draw, 1-1 or something, it's teku. It's a draw. In other words, there's no winners. So when it says teku in the Gemarah, we don't know what the situation is. And it stands for, I can't remember exactly what it was now, Tishbi Yavo Kushyot, and something like that. The Tishbi, Eliyahu Hanavi will come and sort out the answer to this question. That's one way of the Gemarah telling us it doesn't know the answer. The other way of the Gemarah saying, I can't reconcile this, is what we have here. This one word, kasha. Taka, it's a difficulty. Kasher in modern Hebrew means difficult or hard. Okay? We know about the 4 kashas we say on Seder night, the 4 questions. And here, the Gemarah is saying, kasha, taka, it's a difficulty, it's a question, I don't know the answer. The Gemarah cannot reconcile the brises that we learnt last time that says Rabbi Yehuda believes that the equinox starts the new season with our brisa here that says he believes that the equinox ends the old season and that you require 16 days into the month before it's necessary to intercalate the year. So that's the end of that discussion. Kasha, we don't know the answer. We don't know what Rabbi Yehuda holds. We don't know what Rabbi Yossi holds. And we don't actually know what the halacha is. Unless Rav Steinsaltz tells us what the halacha is. Sometimes does on the side of the page, but I can't see that on here.
No.
Right. Okay.
It tells you something on the top of the page, though, about the the seasons of Nisan and Tishri. I don't know how they work that out, so many hours. 91 days and 6 hours.
Yeah. This is how they work this out. Because they could work this out, Johnny, because this was not mathematical science based on physics. It was based on observation.
Yeah.
And one of the things that scientists of old, pre-computers and pre-fancy telescopes and stuff that you would need, like, Jodrell Bank and all that stuff, what they were brilliant at, because they didn't have anything else, was observation. Okay, and what they were able to do was to observe by careful looking at when the molad of the moons were, and when the hours and the days, and measuring the length of night and the length of day. They worked out, no, they didn't work out, sorry, they did not work out. They observed that the seasons were based on 91 days and 6 hours. Okay, so if that's the case, then the difference between the two equinoxes, March the 21st and September 21st, will be exactly 182 days and 12 hours. And they worked that out just by pure observation. So work it out. You don't need to work it out because they've done it for you. If the spring equinox is on the 16th of Nisan, which means that the first day of Pesach is in the old season, in winter, then it will work out, add 182 days and 12 hours to the 16th of Nisan, and you will get to the 22nd of Tishrei. So, therefore, if Pesach is in the winter, then Sukkot will be in the summer. And that's no good at both ways. So the whole thing works out brilliantly because HaKadosh Baruch Hu was very clever and made the Yom Tov of Pesach, the 15th of Nisan, and the end of Sukkot, the 22nd of Tishrei, exactly the same space of time between the two equinoxes. Now, you would say, wow, that's a coincidence, or not, as the case may be. So, who thought, did any of us, I certainly did any of us ever give any consideration to the placement of Pesach and Sukkot? We all thought Pesach took place on the 15th of Nisan, because that's the day that they got released from Mitzrayim, which is true. But why did they get released on the 15th of Nisan? So that Pesach could be on the 15th of Nisan, which is the beginning of spring. So the genius of all of the whole thing of the Torah, of the Gemarah, of everything working out, it's the genius of an amazing puzzle that a human brain could never put together. And, you know, when you look at all of this, we don't need to have proof of the truth of the Torah, the truth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, because if we had proof, it wouldn't be faith. That's the whole point of faith, is that there isn't any proof. If you can prove something, you don't need to have faith in it, okay? At the moment, you have to have faith that the person that you're looking at on this screen and who's speaking is me. You haven't got any proof. It might be somebody who looks like me and who speaks like me, and who has my computer. You don't have any proof. So there is a degree of faith. But if you didn't have my picture and it was just my voice, then you'd have to have a little bit more faith. If you had a distorted voice and only the words, the printed word maybe, you would have to have a bit more faith. If I said, who wrote that? And you'd say, well, I recognize the style. That's Lieberman's style. That's his. Yeah, that's Lieberman. There's much more faith required for that than actually seeing somebody or hearing somebody. So although we don't need proof, for those of us whose faith is a little bit on the weak side, when you see the tremendous complexity, both of the complexity, both of the way the seasons all work out, and the complexity and the vision of the Chachamim putting it all together, it certainly leaves me with a sense of wonderment and a bolstering of faith. For occasionally when you think, well, I'm not sure about all of this, you have a think about that and you think, wow, that's quite remarkable. So we've got to a situation of kasha. There we go, kasha. We don't know. It's a difficulty. Before we move on to the next subject, the Gemara finishes off this subject of intercalation with a little bit more calculations for us. We said before that there was a brisa that said Rabbi Yehuda's opinion was that 2/3 of the month had to go by before we would intercalate. And what was 2/3? 2/3 was 20 days. We said it over here. Shtei yadot, v'kama shtei yadot b'chodesh 20 yom. 2/3. And I said to you, 2/3, that's sensible. A month is 30 days, 2/3 is 20 days. And none of you said, hey, hang on a minute, that's not right. But the Gemara does. Amama. The master said, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda said, Shtei yadot b'chodesh 20 yom. Rabbi Yehuda says that's 20 days. Rabbi Yossi Omer, mechashrin. Rabbi Yossi says 16 days lifnei Pesach, ma'abrin. Hang on a minute, says the Gemara. That's the same opinion as Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says a calculation that shows the winter season has to have finished before 16 days of Nisan will also show that the summer season will finish before 20 days of Tishrei. We've just worked that out. No, says the Gemara. Yom T'kufa Gomer, v'Yom T'kufa Matchil Ikabaynahu. They're not the same. And this is where we have a support for today's first brisa. We said that today's first brisa, there was a machloket as to whether the equinox day began the new season or finished the old season. Let's just go back to what we said, the first things we said. Yom T'kufa Gomer. Rabbi Yehuda says the equinox finishes off the old season. Rabbi Yossi says Yom T'kufa Matchil. The equinox day begins the new season. And this here supports that brisa, because we have one opinion that says it's the end, one opinion that says the beginning, and that makes a difference as to whether we're talking 21st or 22nd for the equinox day. Okay. Amamar. Shisha Asalif Me'achag Ein Ma'abrin. When we're talking Sukkot, Chag is Sukkot, 16 days, not enough. We do not intercalate. Needs to be later, because if it's 16 days, some of Chol Hamoed Sukkot would be in autumn. It's only if it gets as far as the 21st that there are no days of Sukkot in autumn. The Gemara challenges, and he says, no, Ella, rather, the Rabbi Yossi, according to Rabbi Yossi, Shisha Asa Lifnei Achag, Hu Dala. According to Rabbi Yossi, if 16 days, that is when the court will not intercalate the year. Ha Shivasa Utmeina Sama Abrin. This is a real dray, this. They say, the Rabbi Yossi says 16 days, they don't intercalate. And you would assume, therefore, 17, 18, 19, 20, they would intercalate, right? That's what you'd think. Makes sense. Rabbi Yossi says, we do not intercalate if it's only 16 days. The implication there is if it's 17 days or 18 days, we do. This Gemarah says, no, not having that. Rabbi Yossi says, 16 days we don't intercalate. Oh, I never said anything about 17 or 18. You can't imply from my words that 17 and 18 we do intercalate. Well, I think that's a bit. I think that's a bit schwach, personally. The Gemarah asks the question and says, "Can you therefore infer that it's lacking if it's completion for 17 or 18 days, and therefore we do intercalate?" I say, yes, you can. Why would he say 16 if it wasn't 16 and beyond 16 was different? But the Gemarah then goes on to say, Shisha Asar Lifnei Pesach in, B'tzir lo. And he says, no, you're right. He doesn't say that. The court calculates the seasons. If the winter season of Teves, it does not come before 16, we intercalate, finished. Pesach has to be in the spring. But if it's less than that, we don't intercalate. Even if that means that the Sukkot equinox will be 17 or 18. And therefore, we've got a contradiction. But it doesn't work out that way because the calculations are not correct. The Gemarah says, no, you're not right. Lo, idi ve'idi. No, both these inferences are correct. You can have a situation like this. Ein ma'abrin. In both situations, we do not intercalate. But idi ditnei reisha shisha asar lifnei Pesach tana nami shisha asar lifnei Chag. So they use this. The Gemarah falls back on what I consider to be a cop-out answer. And that is that it's using similar language. Since regarding Sukkot, it says since regarding Pesach, it says if it's up to 16 days, it's okay, but 16 days, you have to intercalate because Pesach has to be in the spring. Because it uses that expression of 16 days for Pesach, so it uses the same expression for Sukkot. But really, it doesn't mean 16 and only 16. It means 16 and also beyond. And I don't think that is a good answer at all, because this whole thing, this whole argument is based on being accurate in your language. So here, what they're saying is the excuse is, as it were, that the language is not precise. And so that's the Gemarah's get-out clause. Now, because you can see how weak that get-out clause is, you understand how difficult it must have been for the Gemarah to say over here, kasha, because it can't even find a weak get-out clause. Over here, we've got a real difficulty. Here, we've got a weak get-out clause. And so much so that weak get-out clause that we've got Rabbi Shimon comes along and disagrees, and he says, Af shisha asar lifnei Chag ma'abrin. He says, wait a minute, that can't be the case, what you've just said, that Rabbi Yossi says 16 days before Chag we intercalate, because that's the opinion of the Tanna Kama. And we wouldn't have two Tanoim having the same opinion. Why would we bring Rabbi Yossi? Why would we bring Rabbi Yossi to agree with, why would we bring Rabbi Shimon to agree with the Tanna Kama? So there must be some difference between Rabbi Shimon and the Tanna Kama. And so now we go over the page and we find the answer. Ike beinahu, and the difference is, quite simply, our brisa from this morning. Okay, one of them holds that the equinox begins the new season, and one of them holds that the equinox finishes the old season. Velo mesaimi. The only problem is we don't know who holds what. So the Gemarah here is basically holding its hands up like we all are and saying, God, I can't get this. I don't know who holds what now. Everything is all confused. Rabbi Shimon and the Tanna Kama appear to be saying the same things, but they can't be. So that means one of them must hold that the equinox begins the new season, and one must hold that the equinox ends the old season. But I can't tell you which one it is, because I've got one brisa that supports one opinion, and I've got another brisa that supports another opinion. So they just don't know. This is one of those unusual Gemorahs which ends up with no conclusion on that point. And just to finish the calculation business here, we're going to go back to what Acherim, Rabbi Meir, says. Acherim Omrim, others say, meaning Rabbi Meir, Mioto, the year is intercalated even on account of a minority of the month. So in other words, if there's a minority of the month in the wrong season, not the majority, but the minority even, then we have to intercalate. And how much is that? 14 days. 14 days. Maika Savri. Okay, so how does that hold? What does that mean for Acherim? Does Acherim hold that the equinox day finishes the season or begins the season? Well, let's see if we can work it out. Yom Tkufa Gomer, if they hold that the equinox finishes the old season, and we need the whole of Sukkot, the whole of Chol HaMoed Sukkot to be in the autumn, then we have it. We've got that. Okay, this condition is fulfilled, even if this season is lacking 15 days, which is not a minority, because when does Sukkot start? The 15th. But we said, do you remember, the first day of Sukkot doesn't count. That can be in the summer. Why? Because you can't collect the produce on the first day of Sukkot, because Yom Tov. You're not allowed to go out and collect the produce. So we're only interested in Chol HaMoed. What day is the first day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot? The 16th. So if Rabbi Meir Acherim is worried about that, then he should have said 15 days, not 14 days, because he's only bothered that the Chol HaMoed Sukkot should be in the autumn. So that can't be right. So what does that mean? Rabbi Shmuel, Bari Rav Yitzchak, Rav Shmuel Bari Rav Yitzchak explains it like this. Acherim bitkutaf Nisan kaime. When he said 14 days, he was talking about Nisan. He was talking about Pesach. He wasn't talking about Sukkot. Okay, Dichtiv Shamor et Chodesh Ha'aviv. Make sure you preserve, you guard the month of spring. What does that mean? Shmor Aviv shel Tkufa sheyehei b'Chodesh Nisan. Make sure that the month of Nisan is in the spring, meaning most of the month of Nisan. So he says, if a minority of the month is in the old Tkufa, that's okay. And what's a minority as far as Nisan is concerned? 14. Why? Because 15th is what day? What's the 15th day of Nisan? Pesach. Pesach has to be spring. So therefore, if Acherim was talking about Nisan and not Tishrei, then he's right to say 14, because the 15th has to already be the new season. It has to be spring. Whereas if he was talking about Sukkot, then he can go way in. He can go as far as the 20th. Or if he wants to have the whole of Sukkot, he can go as far as the 15th, not the 14th, because of the fact that Chol HaMoed doesn't begin till the 16th. So if we boil it down, what's the difference between the Sukkot and the Pesach idea? The difference is, at the end of the day, that the whole of Pesach has to be in spring, including day one. According to all opinions, as far as Sukkot is concerned, the first day of Sukkot can be in the summer. Some say only the last day of Chol HaMoed Sukkot has to be in the autumn, and some say that all the days of Chol HaMoed Sukkot has to be in the autumn. But everybody agrees that the first day of Sukkot, which is not Chol HaMoed, can, if necessary, be in the summer, which is not the case with Pesach. So you have a difference between Pesach and Sukkot in that, with regard to intercalation, is a bit of an anomaly here. Chol HaMoed is more important than the first day of Sukkot. I know that's a weird way of putting it, but in terms of intercalation, the first day of Sukkot doesn't matter. That can be in the summer. What can't be in the summer is Chag HaAsif, the festival of gathering. Well, you can't have a festival of gathering on a day you're not allowed to gather. So the festival of gathering must begin on the first day of Chol HaMoed. Now, you're going to say to me, well, isn't Pesach called the harvest festival? And the answer is no. The other harvest festival is Chag HaKatzir. Correct, Johnny Halpern. The other harvest festival is called Shavuot. Shavuot is not on an equinox. Shavuot is bang in the summer. We don't have to worry that Shavuot, a festival there, is not in the right season. Only we'd have to worry about Sukkot. And we don't have to worry about the first day of Sukkot, because you can't go gathering on the first day of Sukkot anyway. It's genius. When you actually sit down and work this out and see how deep and complicated and complex was their discussions about these dates, it's just, it never ceases to amaze me. So a trick question
Johnny, before you get onto your trick question, which I won't be able to answer, I'm glad you did that final summary, which actually made the thing comprehensible. It is the most difficult subject. I mean, really difficult. And certainly, if I was asked to repeat any of it, I wouldn't even know where to start. But that summary was great.
Thank you. I'm glad you said that, because that summary was for my benefit as well. I also found it very difficult. If you make yourself a chart, which I did, I'm not going to show you because it's all scribbled and it won't mean anything to you. But if you make yourself a chart, actually, maybe I'll write it out neatly and send it out on the group. It actually, if you sort of strip away the arguments and just look at the conclusions of each of the arguments, of see who holds what where, you'll see that Rabbi Yossi is fairly consistent with himself. Rabbi Shimon is a bit inconsistent. Acherim is explained away reasonably consistently, and Rabbi Yehuda is all over the place, and we can't reconcile his. But the bottom line is, and this is the trick question, that here's a fair warning. I might put this in the next Hanukkah quiz, so you have to remember it. Okay, in what concept is Chol HaMoed more strict than Yom Tov? There are two answers to that question. One is muktzah, and it's a complicated answer. But the second answer is our thing here. It's intercalation of the year, because the first day of Sukkot, which is Yom Tov, does not interfere with our intercalation. Do what you want, can be summer. First day of Chol HaMoed cannot, according to this opinion anyway. Right, so we've got a few more minutes to finish off this subject, and then we can hopefully get on to Smichat Zakenim next time, but we've still got a little bit to do over here.
Can I ask you, for how many years before these rabbis came on the scene did they celebrate Pesach and Sukkot? It must have been a long time.
Yeah. Over 1,000 years. Yeah, 1,500 years. So what did they do? So the answer is that the Sanhedrin would have been doing this. Remember, this is a discussion that took place in the Gemarah 500 years after the destruction of the temple. So what they're discussing is not actually what they're doing now. What they're discussing is how they worked it out then. This is a retrospective discussion of what went on, which makes it even more remarkable, really.
Yes. Exactly. Thank you.
Okay. So now, Ola Abrela Adar. Okay, says the Gemara. Fair enough. So we've got a note here. This next bit here, most commentaries understand that the discussion is limited to the opinion of Acherim. This is not relevant to us. So the Gemara asks, in a situation like this, why is it necessary to intercalate the year? Let them intercalate the month of Adar by adding a day to it. Okay, why do we need a whole month? If we're only worried about one day, in other words, autumn is coming a day too early. Is that right? Or a day too late? No, a day too late. Autumn is coming a day too late, so that the whole of Sukkot is in the summer. When you intercalate one day. Why do we need a whole month? Do you ever think of that? I never thought of that. If we're short of a day, intercalate a day. If we're short of a week, intercalate a week. Why a month? Good question, no? So what's the answer? Let them intercalate the month of Adar by adding a day to it. And this will cause the day of the equinox to occur during the first half of Nisan. In other words, instead of the equinox being on the 16th, the equinox will be on the 15th. Or instead of it being on the 15th, depending on which opinion you hold, it will be on the 14th. If the equinox is on the 14th of Nisan, all happy, yeah? Because the 15th, according to every opinion, is already in spring. So we're okay. So we just need one day. We don't need a whole month. Good question, says the Gemara. Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Tana milmala lamata kochoshe. Okay, so he says this Acherim worked it top backwards. In other words, he worked it backwards, saying, Ad miyuto ma'abrin, v'chama miyuto arba'i asa yom, up to a minority of the month, meaning if the equinox would occur at the end of Nisan, the court would intercalate the year and would also do so if the equinox would occur earlier in the month, unless it would be early enough that only a minority of the month would be in the previous season. And how much is a minority? 14 days. But if the equinox would occur on the 14th, the year is not to be intercalated, but instead a day should be added to the month of Adar. So in other words, the Gemara says, Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, you're right. On one specific situation, you're right. We'll add one day to Adar. And which day do they add? The 30th. If it would work out that you only needed one day extra, in other words, to move the equinox from the 15th to the 14th, then the Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, you're right. We don't need to intercalate a whole month. We can intercalate one day, because we do that anyway, don't we? From time to time, we make a month 30 days to make up the extra quarter day. On this occasion, we'll make an extra day. The equinox will then be in the new season. The first day of the new season will be at the time of the Chag, and all will be happy. But if it's more than one day, we don't go on and say, okay, well, we'll intercalate 2 days or a week, either one day or the whole month. That's according to Rav Acha bar Yaakov. Okay, Ravina has a different opinion. Ravina says, no, really, he was not talking about Pesach. We said before he was talking about Pesach. Ravina goes back and says, no. How does Ravina know he wasn't talking about Pesach? Because Ravina was here with us at the beginning of the Shir when I said that Chag always refers to Sukkot, not Pesach. The word Chag on its own. So Ravina says, La'olam, really, Acherim b'tishrei kaimim. Rabbi Meir Acherim was not talking about Pesach at all. He was talking about Sukkot. Kulei Chag Ba'inon V'Yom Tov Rishon. He holds that we need the whole of Sukkot to be in the autumn, including the first day of Yom Tov. So Ravina does not agree with my trick question at all. According to Ravina, there is no trick question, right? According to Ravina, Chag HaAsif includes the first day of Sukkot, notwithstanding the fact that you can't go out doing any Asif. You can't go out doing any gathering. Nevertheless, the first day of Sukkot is still called Chag HaAsif. It's still called the festival of the ingathering. And so the Gemara questions that. Hang on a minute, it says Yom Tov Rishon. How is it possible to say that that is included? Chag HaAsif Ktiv. It's written the harvest festival, and you can't harvest on that day. Says Ravina, Chag Haba Bisman Asifa. It means loosely the festival that comes around at the time of the ingathering. Doesn't mean that literally it has to be a festival on which you do your ingathering. It means the festival that happens at the time when the ingathering takes place. Ravina says, don't be such a pedant. When it says Chag HaAsif, it means the whole of Sukkot. How can you be so silly, says Ravina, to make a distinction between the first day of Yom Tov and the rest of Yom Tov? I know, says Ravina, I know the halacha. I know that you're not allowed to do the ingathering on the first day of Sukkot, but that's not what it means. What it means is, when it says Chag HaAsif, it means the Chag which comes around the time of the Asif. So you don't need to get upset about that. I'm happy to tell you that that is the end of the subject of intercalation. We now have 45 seconds left for questions on intercalation, and after that, I don't want to hear about it for a very long time. Any questions or comments? Yes, Johnny. You're muted. Johnny, you're muted.
If you put the screen back on, the last paragraph by Rabbi Steinsel says, the calendar currently in use does not synchronize the festivals with the seasons, and at times the autumnal equinox occurs at the end of the month of Tishri, and the vernal equinox after Pesach. Oh, you got it there.
Yeah, I've got it there, between here, and then it goes on to say,
this is because nowadays, when there are no offerings in the temple, the reasons for the specific calculations of the intercalation do not apply. The only reason for leap years in the current calendar is to synchronize the lunar and solar years within a set cycle.
In other words, because we've got no Bet HaMikdash, we're not all that bothered. Interesting that I hadn't read that. I was aware of that because I know that there is the earliest time that you can have Rosh Hashanah is the 3rd of September. It happened about 3 years ago. It was the earliest time you can have Rosh Hashanah in the current fixed calendar. So if Rosh Hashanah is the 3rd of September, Sukkot is the 17th of September. Okay, so that is before the autumnal equinox. So according to the opinion that says the whole of Sukkot has to be in the autumn, that doesn't work. It does work for the opinion that says that only some of it is, because the last day of Chol Hamoed Sukkot would be the 24th. It would be the 24th, so it would work for that. Now, the other question that arises from that is what is the earliest day in the solar calendar that Pesach can come? Let's have a look and see if Google can tell us that. What is the earliest day in the solar calendar for Passover? March the 21st. Wow, that's interesting. So the earliest Passover can occur is March the 21st, and the latest is April the 20th. So if the first day of Pesach is March the 21st, right, according to that opinion, let's assume that's right. I need to check it out. That's only a quick Google search. But assume that's right. That tells us what about the equinox? That tells us that the equinox begins the new season, that the day of the equinox is the first day of the new season. Because if that was the last day of winter, that means the first day of Pesach would be on the last day of winter, and we can't have that. So that shows that we must hold in practice, and if we hold in practice that, then Rav Steinsaltz's not right on that point, that Pesach will always be in the spring. If we hold that the day of the equinox is the first day of the new season, the day of the spring equinox is March the 21st, the earliest day that Pesach can be is March the 21st, and therefore that shows that the day of the equinox is the beginning of the new season. That's great, that, isn't it? Yes, Leon.
In the art scroll, normally they put as much work on me as they can by quoting the chapter and verse from the Torah. But where it talks about the suggestion that we should just add one day to intercalate one day, the here say, this would make it begin on the 14th, as the Torah requires. But when you look at the footnotes, there's no quote as to where the Torah requires the possibility of having one day added to the year. Only a few lines earlier, they sent me to Devarim, but here, if you have a look at your art scroll, the last line on 13b1, as the Torah requires, but no quote as to where it requires.
Okay. The Gemarah Jets, if the spring is to begin on the 15th, right? If the spring is to begin on the 15th, which is one day late.
Yes.
Why is the 15th one day late? If spring begins on the 15th and Pesach is on the 15th, advance spring by one day on the lunar calendar, this would make it begin on the 14th as the Torah requires. Why does the Torah require? I suppose, is that, I don't know. Do you think that is because Pesach begins in the afternoon of the 14th? We do the Pesach, Korban Pesach. What do you think, David? Is that's possibly what they're talking about?
I agree with you, John, and we've seen earlier that there are two names for Pesach. Chag HaPesach is the actual day of the 14th, when the Korban Pesach was brought, as opposed to Chag HaAviv, which is from the 15th, when Pesach itself actually starts.
Yeah.
So
the confusion is in the naming, and I think that's right. I think that we have to say that when it says as the Torah requires, it's talking about the Korban Pesach is done Bein Ha'arbaim in the afternoon of the 14th, and so Chag HaPesach it would probably be best translated as the festival of the Paschal Lamb, as opposed to the festival of Passover or the festival of Matzot, which begins at nightfall. You can't fulfill your mitzvah of eating the matzah until the 15th, until the nightfall. So that's why they want the spring a day before, so that the spring will be on the 14th.
I'll bring you a further proof of that. You know, when on Motzi Shabbos we say Vihi Noam after the Amida, and if there's a Yontef that occurs during the following week, we don't say Vihi Noam. However, according to many opinions, if Chag HaPesach, i.e. Erev Pesach, falls on a Friday, and Pesach itself, the first day is Shabbat, as I think it was this year, then you don't say Vihi Noam on the Motzei Shabbos because of the Yontef of Chag HaPesach falling on the Friday.
And presumably then, that's not the case with Sukkot that begins on Shabbat. You would
Correct.
say Vihi Noam on the previous Motzei Shabbat.
Correct.
Fascinating. Didn't know that. Thank you for that. Amazing. Right. Any more questions or comments on intercalation before we move on to Smicha next week? Hooray, we're finished.
Kala kavod.
Okay, well done, everybody. You stuck with it.
Well done.
Very good. Okay, we'll see you next week.
I think we should have a siyum now, Johnny.
Yeah, we should definitely have a theme on
Yes.
intercalation.
I think everyone will be pleased to know that that is the most difficult sugya in the whole of Masechet Sanhedrin. It all goes downhill from now.
There you go. You see, if we can do that, we can do anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Kol hakavod.
And we've done it. Well done, everybody.
There we go.
I'm
Well
just
done,
going to stop the
Johnny.
recording.